Hello, welcome everybody. If you can grab your coffee and your water and maybe take a seat, we're going to get started. For those of you I don't know, my name is Ann Whitaker, and I would like to welcome you to our October General PFA meeting. We have a few items of business before we listen to the wisdom that our speaker is going to impart. Just a couple of announcements. It's homecoming week. For those of you that are unaware, a very festive, fun week. I know there's a lot of, today's Clone Day, as I'm sure you're all well aware. All the information's on the website. If you want to have a look at details for I know there's a bonfire on Friday and the game on Saturday, the football game. There's a dance Saturday night. Tickets are $15. It's a very all-inclusive event for the kids. I think it's a Sadie Hawkins, Girls Ask the Guys idea, but certainly kids don't need dates. They're all encouraged to come and enjoy that very quintessential high school experience. So that's Saturday night, if they want to do that. Our next general meeting is November 13th. So you can mark your calendars for that. And then there are also grade level networking meetings throughout November. Those are on the website. So please have a look and you'll get email blasts for those. We are done with our fundraising campaign. If you would like to continue to donate to the campaign, we certainly would still take your donation, but we really appreciate and wanted to sincerely thank everybody who donated. Thank you so very much. It was a wonderful campaign, and we're right now figuring out where to put those dollars to work, so thank you very much. Quick process item, we just need to approve our meetings or our minutes as a matter of formality from our last general meeting in in September. That meeting was with Bill Egan, Coffee with the Principal. Do we have any corrections to the minutes? For those of you that judiciously read them, no corrections, all right. Can I have a motion to approve those minutes? Michaela Nelson, thank you. Can I have a second? Kim Hall, thank you. Any opposition? Wonderful, no opposition. Motion carried, so we'll approve those minutes. So with that, I am going to have Ellen Brzozowski introduce our speaker today, Christina Young. And Ellen is here representing New Canaan Cares, and we just really wanted to thank Ellen for helping us find Christina. We're so excited to hear all that you have to say around staying connected with our teenagers, which is a topic that I know is front and center for all of us in our lives. Thank you, New Canaan Cares, for underwriting this and for hooking us up with Christina. And with that, I will hand this over to Ellen.
Good morning. Thank you all for coming this morning. I just wanted to let you know that if you, I know that after this, you're going to be so enthusiastic about this talk, and so if somebody missed it this morning or wasn't able to come, we are repeating it tonight in this room at 7 o'clock, so please tell people that maybe have not been able to make it that they can come tonight as well, all right? Also on seats, every other seat, there is a handout that Christina prepared, so based on her slides, so if you don't have one on your seat, just find one. They're scattered around there. We'll also put this up on our website as well. So there are also evaluations from New Canaan Cares that we would just appreciate you filling out. We use those evaluations for feedback to plan future programs, to just let us know how we're doing, and it's really important to have your voice and your feedback. So please just take a minute afterwards to fill those evaluations out. And if you didn't get an evaluation, they are over on the table. All right, thank you so much. So now I have the pleasure to introduce Christina. And so Christina Young is a licensed clinical social worker in private practice in Greenwich, Connecticut. Christina has more than 25 years' experience providing professional support to children, adolescents, adults, and families in a variety of settings, including schools, hospitals, and residential treatment centers. She has lived and worked in the Fairfield County area for almost 20 years. Prior to opening her private practice, Christina worked as a parenting educator, school counselor, admissions officer, and teacher. To see Christina at work at a recent event hosted by the Field Club, please watch. Oh, she has videos on her website, but also this will be videoed today. So, Christina received her master's in social work from the University of Southern California and her bachelor's and teaching degree from Barnard College, Columbia University. She and her husband have 3 children, ages 19, 16, and 13. So please join me in welcoming Christina.
Good morning. Thank you so much for being here, and the fact that you have chosen to spend your morning right here already says a lot about you. Thank you to Ellen and New Canaan Cares, and thank you to New Canaan High School, and it's a pleasure to talk with you this morning. So like Ellen said, I have a private practice in Greenwich, and I spend my time working with adults. And my work is primarily on coaching parents on parenting strategies and family dynamics. And like Ellen also said, my husband and I have 3 teenagers. So they are actually older than they are on my website. They are 20 and 17 and 15. So I'm in the trenches with you. I am struggling with all the same things that you're struggling with, and I do not pretend to have all the answers up here. But I can say that I am passionate about understanding the patterns in families and the obstacles that parents struggle with. So that's the reason why I'm standing here. I love to share that information with you, and the more I find out, the easier my job is at home. Okay, so this is the title of the workshop today, and most important to me is that you walk out of here with just 1 or 2 things that you might do differently tonight. That is my bar for every workshop that I attend. I always say to myself, it actually was worthwhile if I leave and I have 1 or 2 things that I do differently. If I have 10 things I do differently, fabulous. But 1 or 2 is actually my bar. And I want to give you just a kind of little map of what we're going to do during this hour together. We're going to start by looking at some facts about the brain. I'm going to try to keep that as interesting as possible for you. And then we're going to switch over to some actual strategies for communication and deepening connection. So there's kind of 2 things we're trying to accomplish here. By all means, I'm happy to take questions at the end of this. So raise your hand if you know Waze or you use Waze. Most of us know it, right? So why am I starting this talk with Waze? I love Waze because I imagine myself sitting on the 95 in the summer on a Friday afternoon trying to get somewhere, and the traffic is brutal. When I look at Waze and it tells me, I see all those red marks and on all the roads that I'm trying to take, it's deeply red, and I think, oh, this is going to be a really rough ride. I then collect myself and say, all right, what book am I going to listen to on Audible? What podcast am I going to listen to? What radio am I going to listen to? Where's my bottle of water? Where are my snacks? And I settle in, and I'm not blindsided by the 20 minutes it takes me to get off an exit and another 20 minutes it takes me to get to my next exit. I am prepared, and I know what to expect. So this is exactly why I like talking to parents. I think we function better if we know what to expect. If we know what's coming, we're not blindsided. And that gives us a little better sense of control. So, very important thing to keep in mind through this entire conversation. Your kids are acting, most likely if they are preteens or they're teenagers, they're acting in a way that annoys you on occasion. It's not because of you. My goal is always to help parents understand the more you can depersonalize, the more you can step back and say to yourself, this is just about what's happening in these kids' brains with the chemicals that are happening in their brains. It's not about me, it's about them. So keep that in mind as we go through this conversation. So buckle up. This is the part where we're going to dig into some science. So we're taking you back to kind of like 6th grade science. And you may or may not recall learning that we are all born with all of our sex hormones in place, which I still marvel at and think it's amazing, especially with girls. Side note, I have 2 girls, and I find it incredible that they were born with all of their little eggs in their ovaries. That's just mind-blowing to me. So all those sex hormones lay dormant for all these years until around 10, 11, 12, and if some of you have a 10, 11, or 12 or way older, you will remember those first little inklings of thinking, what is going on here? Well, essentially what was going on was sort of this avalanche, this waterfall of hormones that was released due to this trigger from one gene in their brain. And all of a sudden, there's an onslaught of change in your child. And this is where we talk about the most massive brain growth that your child will ever go through in their life. Never, ever again will there be such an explosion of brain growth. And we now say there's so much great research that we're privy to that our parents were not privy to. But we say now that that brain period of growth is probably from 12 to 24. Maybe for men, it even goes till 30. So it's quite a lengthy time. I liken this brain growth, this kind of waterfall of hormones, to when we drive off a car lot. So imagine that you buy a brand new car, you're so excited, and it's time to drive off, you've got the keys, and you're kind of herky-jerky. You're not sure how hard on this car do you have to press the gas, how hard do you press the brakes. When you accelerate, do you really slam it, or do you just touch it lightly? And it's a real herky-jerky back and forth thing. This is kind of the same way I want you to think about adolescence and what's happening in your homes. You will see these fits and starts, this back and forth in your child. And it's confusing because you don't know what to expect hour by hour, day by day. You're not sure which kid you're getting when. So in my field, we call this the regressed child versus the emergent adult. And I'll give you an example that I'm sure all of you have seen. I think about my son he's a couple days shy of 15, and we have 2 dogs, and in the morning he uses his baby voice and he's cooing and snuggling with the little babies, and he loves the puppies. If he went here and I saw him in the hallway and I passed by him to walk into this room, he would go like this. That's all I would get. There would be no communication whatsoever because that is the emergent adult that I would witness. And the regressed child is who he probably most likely presents at home. But then again, no, sometimes he confuses me and presents one or the other in other places. So we're all on our toes trying to figure out which one are you going to be. But that's the result of him trying to modulate all of these chemicals that have emerged in his brain. So let's talk about fact number 1. And I promise you there are only 3 brain facts that we will dabble in today. The first one is called individuation. And individuation is really the first step that your teenager is going to take before they leave you. And they are supposed to leave you. So individuation looks like your kid rejecting what you stand for. And it's heartbreaking. And it's upsetting. But again, it's exactly where they're supposed to be. Your teen is separating from you. So let's get into the nitty-gritty of, well, what does this actually look like? So a lot of times you'll remember when your kids were little, they wanted to hang out with you at the end of the day. They wanted to give you all the details. Now it's really a quick, let me have my food, and I'm heading up to my room. And I'm not going to come down again probably till dinner time, which I'll give you 7 minutes for dinner, and then I'm back up in my room. If you dare to ask the question, what happened today? Nothing. Why bother, really, ask the question? You know what the answer will be most of the time. Of course, there are exceptions to the rule. There are plenty of kids who are still chatty and sweet, and when your kid is being the regressed child, they're more chatty and sweet. But when they're being the emergent adult, you're going to get very little information, which is very frustrating. You used to be able to take your child to the family next door. You've known them for 20 years and barbecues, and now you say, hey, we're going to the Smiths. They're having a barbecue dinner on Sunday afternoon. And now you get the, not the Smiths. They don't want to hang out with them anymore. It's not cool to be with them anymore. Stop hugging me. We've all experienced this. This one is interesting. This definitely happens in my home, and I like this, but it hurts at the time. I will walk in, and 2 of my kids will be whispering or talking quietly with each other. When I arrive, they're like, And I can tell, like, oh, okay, so you're not going to tell me what you all were talking about. And I look at it and try to remind myself, this is a positive. The fact that my children have their own sibling relationship is an excellent thing. It hurts because they used to share everything with me, and now they're no longer doing so. This is private, we all hear that. So in the blue is really the only different one, and that's because all of a sudden our kids are looking for peer validation. So when they used to come to us and say, do you like it, Mom? Should I choose this one? You like this one? Now it's all about what do the peers think. So they're asking their peers, do you like it, right? And our opinion actually doesn't matter anymore. So what can you do about this? The first thing is this. I want you to expect it, just like Waze tells us expect the traffic. Now you know. And you probably already knew all this before I told you, but I want to keep it front of mind for you. Expect them to break away from you. Expect them to reject a lot of the values that you hold dear. They don't really mean it, but they have to go through it for a little while and they'll come back around. So know that it's going to happen to you. It kind of gives you an edge when you know something like that. Depersonalize, we've already talked about. I actually will say to clients in my office, it's just business. And they look at me like I'm crazy and like, it's not, it's my child. No, right now it's just business. And the more you can tell yourself, it's just business. This is not personal. This is my child acting on all the chemicals that are flooding their brain. It has nothing to do with me. That can actually be very helpful to remember. Ignore it is the best advice I can give you of all. Really hard to do in the moment. But the more that you can envision almost a shield of armor as you enter the kitchen in the morning and ask yourself, can I just wear that shield and let all of those things that they say at me just bounce right off of me? I'm not going to absorb them and integrate them and act on behalf of them. That's not smart for me as the mom. Develop new interests. So I talk about this one a lot in my office with the women that I work with. There are a lot of times women come in and they say, my kid doesn't like me anymore. My kid mouths off at me all the time. And that one of the first things I want to establish is, do you have any hobbies? Do you work outside your home? Do you volunteer? Do you still have friends of your own? Most likely you have been nose to the grindstone for 10, 12, 15 years. You've been making the meals, you've been supporting your child, going to all the meetings. It's beautiful, it's wonderful. You get applause. But it's probably time to reestablish yourself as an adult and make sure that you have some interests on your own. And finally, don't thwart this process. Then you're going to have a kid living in your basement when they're 30. You don't want to do that. Make sure that you get your kid successfully individuated. Don't stand in the way of it. And if it makes you sad, then talk to your husband, talk to your friends, talk to a therapist. It will make you sad. It will make you feel rejected and make you wonder, what am I supposed to be doing with my time now? But talk to the other adults who are enduring that same thing with you. So fact number 2, I told you there's only 3, we're on number 2, and this one is about the amygdala. And a lot of us have heard, I think, about the amygdala at this point. The amygdala is a little part in your brain, it's like an almond-shaped piece behind your ear. And it plays a hugely important role in understanding teenagers. And that is because the amygdala is the thing that manages our fight and flight and freeze control. So I like to think of the amygdala, actually, and this is why I have this huge, big German Shepherd type dog. It is very highly reactive in teenagers. The brain develops from back to front, unfortunately for us. So that means that the amygdala develops before the next part of the brain that we're going to talk about, which is the prefrontal cortex. And it means that you're going to see very severe reactions to things where you should expect to see a pretty small, ordinary reaction. But because you are in the know and you are a wise parent, you can say to yourself, oh, that's just the amygdala. That's just the amygdala acting up. The thing I like to remind people is the amygdala is why our species is still alive. This is why we're still around. When we were cavemen, the amygdala is the thing that told people run away from the saber-toothed tiger, right? So we don't want to get rid of it. We can't get rid of it. We have to understand it's here for a reason. It actually serves us, right? But we don't want you to be blindsided by the amygdala. It means that you're going to see a reactive and a spastic child. So what does that look like? It looks like you get a phone call from the principal, you get a phone call from a teacher, your teenage son overreacted on the fields today and tried to beat up another kid. Luckily, this doesn't happen all the time. It rarely happens to most of us. But if something like that happens, I hope your first response is, that overactive amygdala. Then you can begin to sort out how are you going to untangle this mess. The same thing with the girl who's screaming. A lot of times we'll see in our kids, and both boys and girls, we will see this overreaction. You didn't get invited to a party. Your friend took your red sweater and you really wanted to wear it that day. It's an overreaction to the situation. Okay, so that is the amygdala at work. Is that next period? Yeah. So what can you do as a parent about this situation? So one thing for starters is educate your kids. I think it's so important to teach our kids about their brain. I love that at school now we have sex ed. Every school has sex ed. It's become very normal. I think we should have brain ed. I think science teachers, health teachers, guidance counselors should be teaching brain ed. And that is so that when your child has an overreaction and they finally calm down, maybe it's the next day, you can sit with your child and you can say, remember how you freaked out last night? That's your amygdala. Then they can understand, there's a reason for that. Just like we teach our kids, you get a fever because you have an infection and your body's trying to kill off the infection. Most of our kids know that. That's helpful information to know about the way that our body works. So I think it's helpful to educate them about the way the brain works. Be transparent, same idea. When you overreact or when their brother overreacts, name what is happening. Be clear with them about what's happening. Oh, that's because his brain isn't fully developed yet. That's why he had such a freak out. At least it brings a little humor to the conversation when you're really seething about everything. And find a mantra. This is the mantra that I use in my home the most of all. And I use it with my husband as well. And I say to myself, when one of my kids is mouthing off at me, I will say over and over again in my head, don't talk, don't talk, don't talk. Because most likely, if I respond to all of that mouthing off, I will say something that I regret, which means that I will fracture the relationship. And we're going to get into that in a moment, but that's the last thing that I want to do. So mantras we're going to talk about a little bit more as well, but they can actually be incredibly effective. So fact number 3, and we're done talking about the brain. The prefrontal cortex is the most important part of the brain, and unfortunately, it's the one that develops last of all. And for some of us, my 20-year-old is in college, hers isn't done yet. I can see that very clearly by some of the choices that she still makes. We're not going to see the prefrontal cortex fully cooked until, like I said, mid-20s, late 20s. But I like to think of the prefrontal cortex as kind of the all-knowing grandpa with the cardigan sweater. It's the calm, guiding hand of the brain. It's the part of the brain that says to the spastic amygdala, settle down. That's impulsive. Let's not do that. That's not a good idea. It's really the voice of wisdom. And anytime that you see in your kids their use of the strong prefrontal cortex, even just little bits of it, you want to pluck those out and hold them up and they look at you go. There's your prefrontal cortex settling in. Yay, yay, yay. We want to applaud anytime that happens. Okay, one other really important thing before we transition. I like to think about the big gaping hole. It's what I call it. It's what I teach parents in my office about it. And I want you to think for a second that you're back out on the road again. It's another driving analogy, and you see the car with the new student, be patient, the new driver, be patient bumper sticker. When we see that, I would argue most of us chuckle a little and it's like, oh, poor guy, you've got a lot to learn out there on the road. And when they don't put their blinker on, or they change lanes and they don't warn you, or they slam on the brakes, you feel a little irritated, but mostly you say, oh, you're a new driver, maybe you'll get that next time. We have this tremendous amount of empathy and patience for them. if you can apply that same empathy and patience to your child, and imagine that in the morning they come downstairs, they get their breakfast, and you say, here's your sticker for the day. I would love it. I imagine as like a crater maybe. It's a sticker we could stick on their forehead, and they would walk around all day long with this sticker. And it would be the reminder, like, you're taller than me, you wear more makeup than me, you dress in a more sophisticated way than I do, you're bigger than me all around. Wow, you look like a big adult, but you've got this big gaping hole, and that's why you're making these terrible decisions all the time. It would give us so much more empathy. So that's my big gaping hole. So as we kind of transition into talking about, we've got some basic information about the brain, and we're going to transition into how do we connect more deeply with our kids knowing this information about the brain. There are two premises that I want you to kind of keep in your head. So one of them is this, and nobody ever wants to hear this, and I get it. I don't want to hear it either, but 99% of parenting is actually about the adult, and I'm sorry that that's true, but it really is true. And you're going to notice in our conversations as we continue, it kind of presents itself over and over and over again. The good news about this reality is that you can change your response to things. That's the positive part of this. Premise number 2 is so important and probably something I talk about every single day in my office. Your ability to regulate your own emotions changes all of your parenting. And it's kind of a hard, cold fact to accept. But the more that you can be in control of yourself and all of your triggers, all of your blind spots, the better off things will go in your house. So let me show you this example. We've all lived through many moments of this. This is a low stakes, easy one. Probably you have much more challenging ones happening in your house now, but it's fun to reflect on these kind of little ones. So let's pretend that you walk into your kitchen and this is your mindset. You had a great sleep. You and your husband had a date last night. You're on really good terms together. Work is going really well. And you ate a great breakfast and you worked out and you feel great. You walk in, and again, you might have the ability to even chuckle and be like, you guys, what did you do? You got into the Cheerios? That's it. That's the whole event, okay? Now, let's say you didn't get any sleep. You and your husband have been arguing about something for a week. You have a massive deadline at work. You haven't worked out in 2 weeks. And your tank is quite low. You're feeling very empty. And you walk in, imagine your response. It's very, very different than the previous one. Most likely you move right into anger and impatience and barking at your kids. The reality is their behavior was exactly the same in both scenarios. This is why 99% of parenting is unfortunately about the adult. So what do we do about it? Let's talk about how do we build in a long pause. And this is something you can teach your kids, you can teach your husband, you can teach your mother-in-law, anybody. And I like to teach it with the hands. So what we do is this, we start and we say, here's a situation. Let's go back to the Cheerios. That's the situation. That's the trigger. Usually we react right up against the trigger. We do not build in a long pause. And usually that is our worst self that we are bringing to that moment. So the goal is, what if we build in a long pause? And here we are choosing a deliberate response, which is very different than an impulsive reaction. So it's the difference between a reaction and a response. If we do this one, it means we built in time to de-escalate, to calm down, to come back to our senses and realize it's not such a big deal. I can be a little more rational in my response. So this is something I'd love for you to be able to teach your kids. How do you do it? There's a million different ways, and I'm sure if I asked each one of you, you all have mastered at least a couple ways, whether it's taking deep breaths. Sometimes I teach kids to squeeze with their hands like they're squeezing lemons to kind of get themselves centered and have a tactile kind of response. Count to 10, run one of your mantras in your head. There's plenty of ways to do this. This is an interesting one that I've had a lot of both adults and teenagers tell me that it works. when you're in the middle of something and you feel yourself getting heated, to imagine that you're stepping off stage. You're going up to the balcony and you're looking down on the moment. And you're giving yourself the opportunity to get some perspective. So we've all heard of this. It's very simple to think about, much more difficult to actually employ. But see what happens if you teach that kind of idea to your kids? So let's talk about mindfulness for a moment. And I know at this part of this talk, a lot of people are like, oh, okay, mindfulness. We kind of almost at this point heard too much about it. But I have trained in mindfulness, and it has been enormously helpful for me. So I want to give you a teeny tactic that I hope you can use. And everything I'm talking to you about today, I hope that you can teach your kids. So for me, when I think about why would I bother to even know what mindfulness is, I like to think about this particular thing. Imagine that you have an angry thought. So I am angry that my husband is coming home late again tonight. That is my angry thought. When I am employing mindfulness, all I'm going to do is imagine taking that thought and putting it in the palm of my hand, and I'm going to extend my hand like this. And I'm going to give myself some space from the thought. I'm going to look at the thought, and it's out here in the palm of my hand. And all I'm going to say to myself is, interesting. I'm having an angry thought about my husband. That's the entire event. That is a demonstration of mindfulness. I am not acting on the angry thought. I'm just holding on to it and letting some time pass. That's the whole event. See if you can practice it. If you are practicing this at home, see if you can narrate it out loud so your kids witness you practicing it. See if then you could say, would that ever work for you guys? Could you ever try something like that? It takes practice, a lot of practice. But I think it's an interesting tactic to try. So let's look at the keys now to the actual ways we can improve communication with our teenagers. And I want to start with what I probably would say is the number one most basic one, and the one that I use the most in my home. It's the one that I teach parents the most in my office. And it has to do with this notion of connect before we redirect. So I want you to think of this story with me. So let's pretend this girl is a 13-year-old girl. She has an 11-year-old sister who absolutely worships her and admires her and steals all her clothes. And the 13-year-old girl babysits and makes her own money, and she's quite proud of that. So she takes this babysitting money, and she goes and buys her favorite T-shirt. And 11-year-old sister steals it without permission, gets a stain on it. So this is 13-year-old girl having found out that 11-year-old sister stole it without her permission, and she's just been screaming and overreacting. In this moment, the parents have a couple choices. They're clearly irritated that their child is acting like this. But if they're smart and if they're wise and if they're very mindful, they will say to themselves, there's that overactive amygdala. And then they will begin to think about this notion of, I'm going to connect before I redirect. Most of us skip the connect and we go right into redirect, which is a lot of times where we lose our kid and then there's another fracture. And again, we're looking for connection. So what does this sound like? It sounds like us saying to the 13-year-old girl, almost as if we're holding up a mirror for her to look in with us. Gee, you sound so angry right now. You look really upset right now. I am only reflecting back what I see. There's no judgment, there's no disciplining, there's no punishment, none of that. I'm just reflecting back what I see. And in that moment, her shoulders go down, and she says, I'm so furious at my sister. Now you've just connected. That's all the connect before redirect sounds like. It's very simple, but it requires that you are nicely regulated yourself. Once you get through that idea of connecting, you're going to begin to help her in a process that we hope will go on forever. This is what we call in my field co-regulating. So you are talking to her aloud about why it's going to be okay. And you're saying to her, I get that you're so upset. I get that you're so frustrated. So irritating when people take things without permission and then stain them. You're explaining to her, all of these feelings. You're naming the feelings. And in doing so, she's internalizing your calming, soothing voice. And each time you do this, she is taking that voice and building it inside of herself so that when she leaves, she has your calm, internalized voice with her. You're not going to college with her. So she needs to be able to have internalized this. So each time you go through this series of steps with her, that's what's happening. And the final part of the redirect it could sound a million different ways. Everybody's calmed down because you've connected. And now you say, how would you like to solve the problem? And you put it on her. You're not solving it for her. How would you like to solve this? And then you can brainstorm together. Do you want to go talk to your sister? Does your sister need to write a letter of amends to you? Does she need to work herself and buy you a new t-shirt? There's plenty of ways to problem solve it. But there's a series of things that has to happen before you get to that part. Just a note on connection. A lot of times in my office, parents will arrive and they will tell me about their kids who don't follow directions. And my first question I always ask when I hear about kids who don't follow directions is, how deeply attached do you believe you are to your child? Do you feel like you're deeply connected? If so, then there's something else going on. But a lot of times people will stop and say, what do you mean, am I deeply connected to my child? And then we'll get into it. Because a deeply connected, deeply attached child is eager to please, eager to cooperate. So in your house, when you're noticing a child who's not eager to please and not eager to cooperate, that's the first thing that I want you to ask yourself is, have I spent enough alone time with this kid lately? Are we connected and attached enough? Because if I can build that, then probably my kid is going to be more eager to please. And I want to jump to the adult level for a section. And I just want to ask you, think about a boss that you've had in your life. And let's start with Melissa. Okay, so Melissa is a boss who was deeply connected to all of her employees. Not in an inappropriate way, but in a way where she knew whether you were married or not. She knew how many kids you had. She knew if you preferred to have pizza or pasta. She knew some little details about your life. And because she invested in knowing you and being somewhat appropriately attached to you, when she comes to you on a Friday at 5 o'clock and says, hey, I've got another project, I'm so sorry to ask, can you stay another 2 hours? You most likely are eager to please and eager to cooperate. On this side, you've got Ryan. Ryan is not deeply attached to his employees. All he does is mandate and dictate, and he doesn't bother to get to know some of the basics in order to have even just a basic connection to his employees. So when Ryan comes at you at 5 o'clock on a Friday and asks you to do extra work, you don't feel deeply attached, you don't feel deeply connected. Probably you're going to say, I can't help you, Ryan. Okay? That's the adult version of exactly what's happening in your home on the kid version with you. Let's talk about strategy number 2, and I would say this is probably the second most important thing that happens in my house. And this is called the circle back. So I want you to think about a teenage girl who has a really hard time getting herself downstairs in the morning. And we've all had these kids, or we all hear about these kids, and it's incredibly frustrating. And she's making everyone else late for school, and it's happening over and over and over again. So I want to show you this step, this script, really, that you can engage in to manage this problem. And essentially what you can do is fill in the blanks. So take out the problem of doesn't get up in the morning and makes everyone late, and fill it in with whatever the problem is. You're going to go through this same kind of script with your teenager. So it starts with this. I'm mom. I'm talking to the teenager who's making everybody late, and I'm going to say, I've noticed that you're making us all late. What is going on? Okay, I am not ridiculing and I'm not criticizing. I'm more bringing it up to consciousness, and I'm putting it on the table in front of us. And I'm saying, what's going on? I'm giving her a chance to kind of explain herself. And she's letting me know, well, I turn off the alarm in my sleep, Mom, which a lot of kids do. And she doesn't mean to do that, but that is what's going on. And she hasn't taken the time to problem solve this. So my next step in this sort of script that I can use with any of these problems is I say, the thing is, and when I get to this part, I'm kind of extrapolating from her issue into how it impacts my whole family. So I'm saying the thing is, it's making all of us late. It's making all of us start the day with frustration and yelling and irritation. And I don't want to start the day that way. So I'm pulling her behavior out into a more macro level and saying, this is how it's affecting the whole family. Next step, how can we solve this together? This is the part where I really want to listen to my kid first. Every single time I listen first and I ask her to solve, guess what's happening to that prefrontal cortex? She's connecting a couple more dots. The connection's getting a little stronger, a little stronger, a little stronger. So every time we have the opportunity to let them do the thinking instead of us do the thinking, that's a win for that prefrontal cortex. So we talk about it, wonder what we could do to solve this problem. We come up with some ideas together, and basically she says, you know what, I'm going to put an alarm clock on the bathroom counter that's set for 2 minutes later, and I'll have the one by my bedside. And I think with the backup alarm clock, I'll be out of bed on time. But we're not done. That's a lovely solution. We're not done. And here's why. We need to be able to say to our kids, you're human, and all humans make mistakes. So I love that we've problem solved. I love that we've come up with a solution. The thing is, what's going to happen if you still wake up late? What's going to happen if you go plunk on that one in the bathroom and you climb right back into bed? And this is where we actually, especially because we're tired and we're busy, we're going to write down the consequences. So in my house, we have a clipboard. We will write down, and I will sign it, and my daughter will sign it. Because if I don't, 2 weeks later when she messes this whole thing up, I won't remember what I said the consequence was. So we come up with okay, Mom, if I do it, if I turn off both alarm clocks and make us late, I lose my privilege of dealing with my own bedtime, and we have to go back to the thing where you come and tuck me in and it's 10 o'clock and you say goodnight. Okay. Do you see how now we went through the whole series of steps? And for now, this problem is solved. Take that same template and you can apply it to many, many, many different problems. So let's look at name it to tame it for a second. And I want to explain anger. And I want to remind you of something you probably already know. Anger is really the bodyguard for us of all the other emotions. Anger is very culturally acceptable. So we hear kids and we hear ourselves all the time say, I was so pissed, I was so angry, she really annoyed me. It's very common to talk about anger. But what's important for kids is that we start teaching them the emotional vocabulary. So I like to explain to kids and to adults, I think of like a garbage can. And anger is the lid on the garbage can. And if we lift the lid and we look underneath, then we can say, well, what's happening under that? And if we start digging around, we actually learn like what you're feeling is actually called humiliation. You're humiliated. That's the word for the way that you feel right now. Or you feel left out. Or you feel disappointed. There's so many other words that are underneath anger. And the notion is that the moment that we name it, we tame it. We begin to diffuse the hold that those feelings have on us when we start naming them. And that's, to me, a really important thing that you can teach your kids. Just another note on anger. This is just a quick little take home, one of those things you can start tonight. So my husband and I a long time ago came up with what is sort of a code expression in our house. And here's how it sounds. Let's pretend I'm out at the grocery store. My husband's home with one of the teenagers and they've gotten into it. And I walk in the door and I can hear and see things have escalated and both of them are out of line. If I walk into that moment, I will say to my husband, didn't you need a shower? You told me that you need to grab a shower before you head to that meeting. The read between the lines on all of that is, I see you. I'm throwing you a life preserver right now. You are out of control. You are about to fracture a relationship. And I am sending you a rescue line. Take it. Be smart. Take it. Let me step in. I am nicely regulated. I've just been at the grocery store. That's the code word in our house. You could come up with a million other ones. But again, it has to do with when I'm witnessing you in a place of dysregulation, I want to help you out. And the key to making this work is obviously you can't do it in the moment. You can't teach it to each other in the moment that it's happening. This is one night when you're calm and all the kids are asleep. This is called proactive, preemptive parenting. You say to your husband, hey, I learned this technique. Can we do this? Can we set this up in our house? And then you set it up. But you have to agree. You have to do it. If I throw you the line, I say, didn't you say you wanted a shower? You have to say, you can't be like, no, I'm going to finish this argument. I'm so that's not the point. That doesn't help anybody. So let's look at strategy number 4 is be genuinely curious. And I want to give you an example of a family that I helped, and it's just such a simple example of we need to continue to be curious about our kids. A lot of times we will say to ourselves, I birthed you, I raised you, I know everything about you. I know exactly why you're doing that. The problem is they evolve and they mature, so we need to keep up with them and we need to keep asking questions. So I helped a family where there was a teenage boy who was really excited to join the swim team. He didn't know what the boys wore at swim team. And he went and he came home and the mom said, how was it? And this is a kid who loved swimming, was so excited to get involved. And he said, I hated it, I'm never going back. And the mom was like, what is going on? And the mom, without asking questions and without being curious, because the kid had a little bit of a history of being lazy and quitting things, jumped right into a lecture. You're being lazy. I can't believe you're quitting something else. We already paid for this. All of this kind of talk. Turns out the kid was embarrassed to wear the tight, tiny bathing suit that he had to wear for swim team. That was the whole story. He was dying to do it. He just felt embarrassed about his body. And so it was an entirely different conversation that needed to occur about helping this kid have a conversation with the coach. The coach obviously had other kids before that kid who were embarrassed about their body. The coach helped the kid figure it out. But if the mom had been curious from the get-go and not made assumptions, it would have been one less fracture in their relationship. Just another quick story about being curious. I helped a family where the kid decided that she no longer wanted to attend any events at their country club. When she was a little girl, she loved to go to all the camps and the swims and the birthday parties. And she said, I don't want to go to anything. And the parents were so concerned and thought, what is going on? And why doesn't she want to go out? And it turns out this kid, same thing. If the parents have been genuinely curious and asked, we don't understand what's changed. Can you explain what's going on in your head? She might have been able to give an answer. But the parents made all kinds of assumptions. And in this case, it was assumptions about, well, you just think that you don't want to be friends with this one. You don't want to be friends with that one. You know they hang out at the country club and all that kind of language. So it's the reminder, ask questions. I will say to parents sometimes, pretend you don't know your kid. You've actually never seen them before. That's how curious I want you to be about what's happening in this kid's head. These are just a couple questions in terms of eliciting more information when you're being curious, right? That notion of tell me more is the greatest thing you can ever say to a kid. It's very neutral, it's very open-ended. You've never asked me this before, take your time. Is there anything else I need to know about this problem? That's a great question to ask your kids. Sorry, did you want it back? So strategy number 5 has to do with something that's kind of delicate for all of us to talk about. And it is the reality that most of us as mothers want to rescue our kids. It's innate. It is our mama bear instinct. It's very, very difficult for us to tolerate watching our children be uncomfortable. It's hard for us to watch them struggle. So we tend to rescue. So I want to explain this scenario to you. I want you to imagine that this is a 14-year-old girl. She's come home from school, and she is the type who usually goes right upstairs to her bedroom. But today she's come home in tears. And she kind of collapses before you, the mom, and she says, All of these girls I usually sit with at lunch today said, you can't sit with us. They gave me no explanation, and they were quite harsh and cruel. And I can't sit with them anymore, and I don't even understand what happened. And she's crying and crying and telling this story. Well, imagine if your child comes home and tells you this, you would be devastated on behalf of your child. And all of those tendencies to rescue would flare up. That might sound something like, I'm going to call all their mothers. I'm going to talk to the guidance counselor. I'm going to talk to the principal. We become mama bear, right? So instead, what I want to invite you to think about is this. The very first thing is you want to name the feelings with your daughter. Wow, you sound really upset. Wow, this seems devastating to you. Wow, I can imagine how sad you are right now. And then I just want you to sit in the muck of the discomfort. And this is what it sounds like. Nothing. You're not filling it with noise. You're not filling it with talking. You've just named her feelings. And you're sitting in the muck of, these feelings are awful and uncomfortable. And once you've sat with them long enough, now you can say, I wonder what you want to do to solve this problem. But what are you teaching your daughter? You're teaching your daughter in that moment, we can do hard things. We can handle big, ugly feelings. We don't have to rush through them. We can tolerate them. And we can sit with them and we can bear them. And then we can begin to problem solve our way out of them. So that's what not rescuing sounds like. Identify the lagging skill. So this is an interesting tactic, and I would say it's pretty hard to use, but very helpful to try to use. Instead of looking at our kids and labeling them. So I'll hear parents all the time in my office, they'll say, my child is so manipulative. My child is so lazy. My child does all this on purpose. I'm going to ask you instead to imagine that your child has a lagging skill. And by that, I mean there's some deficit that you have identified. There's something in their brain that hasn't quite come together yet. And you're seeing the evidence of that. That's all it is. This is depersonalized, like we talked about in the beginning. It's not about you. They're not trying to be annoying to you. It's just that you're witnessing there's something that hasn't come together yet. So imagine that you have a kid who can't bring their stuff to school. They're constantly forgetting their assignments. And you go up in the bedroom and you see that the final project is laying on the bedroom floor and the kid's at school. And you get the email and you get the phone call, and this is going on and on. It's very easy to have so much anger toward your child and to say to your child, you're being so annoying. You're so lazy. I can't believe you're doing this. Get it together. When in reality, your kid is giving you evidence that he has a lagging skill. In this case, we could call it poor executive functioning, or we could call it inability to follow through, or inability to finish the job, whatever we want to label it as. But my point is this, there are many ways to solve that problem, and we're not going to get into them today. But most importantly, if we're looking to deepen connection with our children, let's try and identify the lagging skill instead of calling them names. So strategy number 7, I love this one and I use this one all the time. And this one is an easy one to teach, an easy one to use. And it basically looks like this. And when I'm teaching this one or using it with my own kids, I always use my hand and I always picture making like a picture frame. And I'll say to my kids, in our family, we don't slam doors. In our family, we drive the handed down car. In our family, we text when we're going to be late. In our family, we hold the door for each other. That's all it is. But essentially what you're doing is teaching the cultural norms of your family. And it helps when your kids come home and they say, well, I slept over at so-and-so's house. And in their house, they get to do da-da-da-da-da. That's great. In our family, we do such and such. And now my kids will do it back to me, which is when I know I'm being annoying. But it's a really simple one to remind them, this is what our family culture is about. This is why Dad and I are doing this all the time. We want you to understand what the family culture is about and why we enforce these rules. This is a really tiny, simple one to keep in your back pocket, and you can use this one tonight. If you talk in a whisper, first of all, you will get your kids' attention. You've all heard that before. The other thing is if you mostly talk in a calm voice and you are mostly well-regulated with your kids, and you suddenly say to your kids, now, and you give them that face, you can sometimes get their attention. So give it a try. It's a tiny little tactic, but your kids, especially if you tend to be nicely regulated, will look at you like, what was that? And you can get their attention. So that's a teeny one. Strategy number 9 is so helpful. You can use this with little kids. You can use this with college-age kids. And essentially what this sounds like, let's pretend that your son comes home and he says, I bombed on my science test. And he's really upset about it. And he's a pretty devoted science kid, and he wants to do well in that class. He has some skills to learn, and the way that he can learn those skills is with you in a dress rehearsal. And all this is you saying, do you think that you would like to talk to your teacher about, is there extra credit? Can you do another project? Is there any way to help boost this terrible test score? And most of our teenagers are scared to go and talk to their teachers. So all it is you saying, I'm mean old Mr. Smith, you're you. Let's go through the actual sound of you coming to talk to me and run the dress rehearsal through. Teach your kids the actual words that they would need to say to get what they want. We sometimes make assumptions that they already know how to do things. And some of these very, very basic things that we do all the time, they have no idea how to do it. Really quick side note, I've moved my 15-year-old son to a thing where he makes all of his own appointments. I want him to know how to call a doctor, how to call a dentist, how to make a haircut appointment. He asked me the other day when I said, you need to book the haircut appointment, he said, Mom, what do I say? And I said, okay, we've got a lagging skill. Let's teach to the lagging skill. Here are the exact words. Hi, my name is, I would like a haircut on such and such date. My favorite guy is the guy named Joe. Is he available at 4:00? But my son actually needed me to run through the exact words. But now I've taught to the lagging skill, and he knows exactly how to do it. Okay? So that's something like a dress rehearsal. I love the word yet. And I use it with myself, I use it with my kids, I use it with my husband. And I don't know how much you've learned about the growth mindset, but this is very much in keeping with the growth mindset. And all it is reminding your kids, especially if they come home and they're upset, and again, maybe they've gotten a poor grade on something, they've managed to forget something, you can say to them, you don't know it yet. You haven't mastered it yet. Same as I'm trying to learn tennis. I'm horrible. I never played any ball sports, hand-eye coordination sports as a kid. I'll say to my kids when they see me trying to serve, I can't serve yet. But it's an indicator of hopefulness. It's an indicator of if I apply myself and I really master these skills, I might eventually get it. So there's an open-mindedness, there's a growth mindset when we use that word yet. And it's an invitation to your kid, I believe in you. I think if you continue to apply yourself, you might be able to get this. Permission to delay is so hugely important with our teenagers. And I want to give you a story about GovBall. I don't know if you know what GovBall is. If you don't, it might be coming your way. So GovBall is a huge music festival that is on Randall's Island. Usually, I think it's like the very beginning of June. It's really meant for 25-year-olds, but all of our teenagers think that they belong there. And GovBall is a place where there are a ton of drugs. There's obviously a lot of drinking. But it's a blast because there are many different concerts going on simultaneously. So you get your friends and you're like a roaming band of teenagers going to all these concerts. So my daughter came to me as a junior and with the laptop in hand, and she'd already dialed up the tickets on Ticketmaster where the thing displays 5 minutes 42, 5 minutes 41, 5 minutes 40. And she brought it to me, having never even, I had to learn in that moment what GovBall was. And she said, Mom, I want tickets to GovBall with the clock ticking like this. Now the old me, who was uninformed, would have been like, oh, this is chaos, and I might have yelled at her, and I might have said, like, oh, we've got 13 seconds left. And I'm delighted that I know about the tactic called permission to delay. So somehow we all came to believe that we owe our teenagers an answer immediately after no matter what the scenario, somehow someone told us, you're always supposed to know what to do. Well, we don't. Of course we don't. So it's okay to say to your kids, this is a big one. I need some time to think about this. I'll get back to you in 24 hours. And why I love this is it reestablishes control. You're the adult, they're the teenager. And it also helps them build the muscle for tolerating the discomfort of not knowing. They want to know everything, and they're used to living in this very fast-paced world where everything is immediate. And we suddenly come at them and say, got to think about it, got to do my research, got to ask some other moms, got to talk to your dad. I'll get back to you in 24 hours. They're appalled that we would dare to take the time to think about something. But in that 24 hours, obviously we're doing our homework and deciding, is this a good decision or not? That's permission to delay. Ask about the little voice in the head. This is so important. So I want you to imagine a teenage boy. You've set up a curfew of 11:30. He goes to a party. He doesn't text you. It's 11:45. You're tired. You've been waiting up for him. You know his phone is working. And he doesn't text you anything. And now it's 12:30. You have tried to be calm and not call anybody, police, friends. You're saying to yourself, okay, wow, he's really blown it here. This is going to be a big one. And he comes in the door at 12:30, and you are relieved, and you can see he's in one piece, and you send him to bed. That's the smart decision. You check, okay, he's breathing, he's fine, and I'm sending him to bed. Don't get into the conversation at that hour. It's not smart. Next day, he wakes up. You say, come with me. We're going to sit and have a conversation. And the conversation is all about this little voice in the head. And it starts like this. When you made the decision to blow off your curfew and to stay out late without texting me that you were going to be late, was there a little voice in your head that said, not a great idea? And then wait. Be silent and wait. And I guarantee you, every one of your kids, and especially yours, because you're here attending a parenting talk, every one of your kids, tail between their legs, will say, yeah. And then essentially you're done with the conversation at that point, because you have already shown your kid you know right from wrong. What happened is you chose not to listen to the little voice in your head. And therein lies the rub. And this is when you say to your child, what happened? What got in the way of listening to that smart little voice in your head? And then you're silent. And again, you're sitting in the discomfort of the muck of your child grappling with his own integrity in front of you. It's very uncomfortable. But you are not rushing in to rescue. And eventually he says something, because he's embarrassed, and he should be. And eventually he says something, well, and he starts in with whatever excuses, and you let him know. You need to think about your dignity. You need to think about your integrity. You need to think about listening to that little voice in your head. And that's the entire conversation. You're done. There's no yelling. There's no fracturing of the relationship. There's no consequences doled out. You've just done the most impactful thing you can do, which is get your kid to grapple with his own integrity. And why is it important? Because we're raising them so they go. And he needs to really solidify that voice of integrity before he goes. So that's the little voice in the head. We are almost done. Acceptance. So a lot of parents struggle with accepting their kid for who their kid actually is. And it's hard to admit that. But one of the most powerful things that I can say to a parent is this: why don't you go home tonight, and when you say goodnight to your son or you say goodnight to your daughter, you say to them, "You're exactly the girl I hoped to get. You're exactly the boy that I dreamt of having when I found out I was pregnant with a boy." Can you imagine more powerful words to receive from a parent? Because we spend an enormous amount of time implying you're not good enough. You need to get better at that. Why didn't you make the travel team? Why did you bring home a B-? How come you didn't get invited to that? There are so much negativity in the way that we interact. So to be able to let them know with that statement, "You're exactly who I hoped I would get," is letting them know, "I love you exactly as you are today." It doesn't mean we're done parenting, but it does mean I'm demonstrating 100% acceptance. I just want to go back to the mantra idea for a second and give you one other one that is incredibly helpful. And that is this. This is what you think to yourself: I'm not afraid of your being mad at me. A lot of us have fallen into the trap of thinking that we are supposed to be best friends with our kids and that we are always supposed to be simpatico, everything's good between us. And an excellent mantra is to say what we need to say, to establish a boundary, to give a firm no, and when it's uncomfortable and we feel ourselves saying, ugh, we say in our own head, "I'm not afraid of your being mad at me. I know how deeply attached we are. I raised you. We can handle this. We are so deeply attached that of course we can handle you feeling upset that I imposed a boundary, that I said no." So we're coming to an end, and I want to remind you of just a couple closing thoughts. This muscle that we can work in our kids of helping them to tolerate discomfort, it's called distress tolerance in my field. Really important. Any moment that you can find that will help your kids to manage the discomfort of not knowing, the discomfort of, I feel awful and I've got to sit with it for a little bit. That's a good moment. And see if you can catch yourself wanting to rush out of that moment and actually staying in that moment. Just a reminder again, we don't have to be friends with our kids. And I love this because it's a reminder you actually already were a teenager. You went on that roller coaster, all the highs and lows of being on that roller coaster. Don't get strapped in the car again with your teenager. Stand on the sidelines and wave them in when they arrive, but don't do it again. You've already been on that ride. And in terms of considering your legacy, sometimes if things are rough and you're having a really miserable day, it's really helpful to pull the lens way out and ask yourself, what do I hope my kids remember about me? What do I hope my kids say about me? It's a really nice perspective check. And the other piece of that, and more in terms of your kids, is to be able to say to your kids when things are rough and you need to pull that camera back a little, what kind of young man do you hope to be? What kind of young woman do you hope to be? Is a really nice grounding question. If you've gotten caught in the weeds with your kid and you need to kind of pull the lens out a little bit, it's an interesting conversation to have. So I just want to remind you that research tells us that when we attend a talk like this, if we do not implement one or two things immediately, we may as well have not attended the talk. So see if there is something, even one thing, that resonated with you today, and give yourself that homework of maybe there's a chance that I could try this tonight. Maybe I could call my sister and say, hey, are you doing this with your kids? I learned about this today. See if there's something that you can do that might keep one or two of these things actually solidified in your brain. And I'm happy to take questions. Sure.
When you say be curious,
That's a great question. The question was, when you're curious and your child does not want to talk, what are you supposed to do? Are there strategies to get them to talk? My answer is actually it wasn't the right time. And if we're looking always to maintain connection, think of how you feel. Some of us, when we're very upset or we're very angry, and your best friend or your mom or someone's like, tell me what happened, what happened, what happened. There are times when we say, I need to sit with my own thoughts. And I would argue a lot of times our teenagers need to sit with their own thoughts. And the way we can wrap up kind of a frustrating moment like that, where we wish that they would give us something, is we can say, I'm ready to talk when you are. Come and find me when you're ready to talk. You know I'm always here for you. Does that help? Only a tiny bit. Other questions? Help her. So your concern is that when she goes off to, she's been in the habit of talking to you pretty openly, pretty regularly, and when she goes off to college, it sounds like you're wondering, is she not going to have to replace you maybe and find... You don't want her calling you. Yeah. So to me, this is really a moment to be transparent and to be open with her. So I don't know, is she getting ready to go to college? She's a junior. Okay, but it's not too early to start that conversation. And maybe that conversation sounds something like recognition first of, wow, I so appreciate that we have this open dialogue, and it's so much fun, and I love being privy to all these details in your life. I'm starting to think about what that's going to look like when you go to college. And I'm wondering if you might want to start preparing in your head for knowing there might be a little more distance between us, and that's okay. And that's super healthy. And what's wonderful is that me as the mom, I've really shown you what that primary relationship looks like. And I've taught you in that most fundamental relationship, these are the patterns of communication, and the best ones are those that are open and honest. And you'll be able to take those as you delve into new relationships with other friends who might begin to take my place. But she might need permission from you to know it's okay that friends might step in. Sure.
This is somewhat off topic. Well, it's on the topic, but it's like, okay, we talked a lot about them going into this phase. Can you give some advice on coming out of it? Because I'm starting to see, I'm a junior and a junior in college, and I'm starting to see like some signs of maturity.
Yep.
And do you have any advice so there's light at the end of the tunnel?
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you have some advice for managing that process?
Absolutely. I have my daughter's a sophomore in college, and I'm seeing the same thing. And it is the greatest pat on the back ever to notice when she sent our family cupcakes the other day from California with a card that said, I miss you guys and I can't wait to see you. And my husband and I were like, wow, she's thoughtful. It's delightful to start seeing it. And my first response is, again, in an effort to always be open and transparent, to be able to say aloud to your kid, isn't this delightful? Look at you. You have become so thoughtful. You have become so mature. I see you putting yourself in other people's shoes. I see you being an empathetic person. It is delightful. I don't know if you're suggesting there are problems as they move, as they get older. For me, it seems a lot of positives and fewer problems.
Because you're in a mindset of like, okay, they're dopey, and I got to manage all this, all the strategies and all that. But then you start to see the light of the tunnel.
Yeah.
Pulling back, and how do you manage it?
Yeah, I think it's just acknowledging out loud what's happening and almost applauding them while also applauding yourself. And also, you can always let your child know at any age, what do you need from me now? So I'll say to my, 17, what do you need from me now as a 17? This is what you needed from me as a 16. What do you need from me now? So same way you could say, wow, you just turned 23. What do you need from me now? Does it look different than what you needed from me when I was 22, when you were 22? It's a good question. Any other questions? Sure.
Well, clearly I need therapy during my child's because I'm sitting here in a complete panic.
Oh, no. That was not my intent.
If I go home and do all these things, my kid might think, what has she been smoking?
Right. It's a great question. Never too late, ever, 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 ever. And I would again, I am always, if anybody ever comes and works with me in my office, they always hear me talk about transparency. I am all for transparency, no secrets in families. So if this is how you're feeling as a response to this talk, I would love for you to go home and say to your kids at dinner or bedtime or hanging out, I learned a lot of cool stuff today. You're going to see me act a little differently. Let's give it a go. But be open about, because what are you modeling? You're modeling, I always want to be the best version of me available. So just like all of us go to different workshops or classes or whatever, we go because we're hoping to evolve. We're hoping that when we leave the room, we're a little different than when we entered the room. So model that for your kids. I went to a talk, I learned some stuff, I think I want to try it out. So you might hear my voice sound different. You might hear me responding differently. Let me know how that goes for you, right? It's the same thing as being able to say anytime to our kids, how am I doing as your mom? It's a great question to ask. You got to have some courage to hear the answer. But that kind of transparency, again, is what deepens connections, for sure. Yeah.
So when I do make changes and I do set limits, my youngest will say, so why are you in such a bad mood? Even though my voice is not me.
Yep.
So what could you say?
Yep.
What could I say to them?
Oh, it's a great question. I would be very likely to say, that's so interesting that when I set limits, the messaging for you is mom is in a bad mood. And instead, I wonder if the messaging could be, mom cares about me, mom's looking to protect me, mom's looking to set boundaries for me, because that's what the best moms do. He's just messaging it that way, and all you need to do is get in and let him know that's actually an inaccurate message, right? Any other questions?
I just, one, a child, you may have child that it seems you can't believe it's your child, they're so opposite of your personality.
Yes.
The one that like wasn't born with empathy, it just doesn't come natural.
Yep.
And social cues are off.
Yes.
And my biggest worry is I've damaged them because I definitely don't pause all the time. You know, sometimes I do that.
Most of us don't.
And I've said like if there was a video camera in my house, I'd be in jail. And then I think how for certain things I've said, so I've always wondered like how do you recover from that?
It's a great question.
Done some great things,
It's a great, great
but
question.
you're like, oh no, I can't.
So I love this question. First of all, thank you for your honesty. I really appreciate that. And it's also, the reason I do this work is that I do think I'm a hopeful person. I always believe in change is possible for all of us. And so I look at that and think, what if you selected one or two? Don't overwhelm yourself with 5 or 6, but 1 or 2 specific things that you would like to improve in your demeanor at home. That's all. Just start with that. And then be accountable. So say out loud to your family. So listen, I learned some stuff. I want to make some changes. So you're going to see me working on this. Put it on the fridge. Put it with a sticker, a magnet on the fridge. Mom is working on counting to 10 before she responds to something. Whatever it is, out yourself. Completely out yourself. And let your family know, I'm working on this. And give them cues. So when you see me overreact or respond too quickly with negativity, tell me, Mom, and point to the fridge. What, aren't you supposed to be working on counting to 10 before you? And let them in on your struggle. Because guess what happens when you model that? Everybody else decides, oh, in our family, we talk about our struggles. In our family. But whenever you're thinking in that way, ask yourself, if I make myself vulnerable, what am I modeling? Well, you're modeling a great thing. We are human, therefore we struggle. We mess up. So I'm going to own up to some of my struggles, and now I'm going to try and fix a couple of them. You guys help me. Will you please help me? Okay. Anything else? Yeah, in the back.
An example that you gave, like, with the girl who was making the family late in the morning, and you like wrote out the consequences.
Yep.
Okay, so what happens when she doesn't wake up with the second alarm and makes the whole family late, and you're now tucking her into bed at 10 o'clock every night, and you're like, okay, I'm really done with this.
Right.
Or she's really done with this. Like,
Right.
how do you? What's the next step? Like, how do you get her up? 'Cause, okay, you're tucking her into bed.
For me, the
Like,
next step would be a circle back again, which is painful and tedious. But for me, It's the taking the lid off the behavior, the garbage can kind of analogy. So on that, the garbage can lid is the kids waking up late. I need to look under and say, wonder why? There's a reason. So does she not get enough alone time? Or is her day overpacked? Does she have really big feelings that are making her anxious so she can't fall asleep? Is she nervous about a teacher tomorrow? There's something. And that's when we become like a detective and we get really, really curious with our own kid and we try to sort out there's something driving that behavior. And at that point, I want to get way more curious about what's driving the behavior than any kind of consequences. The consequences aren't going to change the behavior. Does that help? Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
So leaving without her would not solve it at all.
That's an option for sure. Here's the only thing I'll say about an option like that is be fair and respectful and let her know, please don't ever do that in the moment, right? Because, but for sure you could let her know, if you guys go through that whole 4-step process and you come up with the consequences that you're going to write on the contract, that you could say. So one of the consequences, we're both in agreement, we're both signing off on it. So there's plenty of lead time, she knows about it. Yeah, I'm gonna leave you. If you're not down there by 7:15, I'm leaving you. I guess you gotta Uber, you gotta walk, I don't know. And if you're Ubering, by all means, you're paying for it. I'm not paying for it. Yes.
I just want to thank you because this was wonderful, and I'm Susan Bliss, the Student Support Coordinator, and it fits so nicely with what we're doing as a district because we've really been focused on emotional intelligence.
Oh, great.
And we're teaching all the kids, K through 12, really all about name entertainment.
Oh,
really
good.
recognize their emotions and regulate, and strategies to regulate emotion. So I just wanted
Fantastic.
to mention that because as parents ask them about it, and hopefully reinforcing that, whether, we're just doing a little bit here and there, but I think it's such an important.
Oh, thank you very much. I'm glad. All right, well, have a wonderful day. Thank you for coming.